We're doing a live power lesson here. And today we're going to be talking about binge eating, emotional eating, overeating. This is going to be extremely helpful for you. And let me just say this first. Anytime that myself or anybody starts to use words that have some emotional charge, that are designed to kind of group behaviors or people or activities into different groups and kind of be judgy about them, I would encourage you to just try and take a 30,000 foot view and remember that like any strategy like that where we're trying to understand, where we're trying to use words and language to describe an experience of life, that words will always fall short. First, let's talk about overeating. Overeating is if you are eating more than what your body actually needs or even sometimes wants in any particular setting. Oftentimes that can have to do with, if you're drinking a little bit or a little bit too much. Sometimes the signal from the body can be softened and you're not really getting the signal from the body of like, hey, we've had enough. Other things that can really trigger overeating: not having breakfast, having a small lunch or like just salad because you're trying to be good and be on a diet, or just having a bar or getting caught up in work and not having lunch at all. Those things really set us up for an overeating experience in the evening time. And what's interesting is that we're overeating for that moment, but it's like your body is letting you know, hey, I haven't had the regular sustenance that I need throughout the day to like thrive and to survive and to feel like things are okay and that I'm safe. In terms of calories, sometimes you end up getting them, all of them, in the evening. So maybe you're having like the whole day's worth. That's not super awesome for the stomach or for the digestive system or for your sleep or for your hormones or really anything like that. So not having breakfast and or not having lunch or just having a little bit because you either got busy or you're trying to quote diet and be good, and then you end up overeating in the evening time. That's super common as well. Some other things that can really stimulate overeating is stress. And I'll tell you that sometimes it's like soothing to overeat when you're stressed out. And also sometimes it's just the physical body. So there's certain vitamins and minerals that get used up really quickly when we're under a lot of stress. And it doesn't have to be like life and death stress, just checking emails, right? Like the more decisions that you have to make throughout the day, the more stressful the day becomes, right? Because you're having to really focus, to be attentive, to be aware. So if you've got kids and you've got work and you've got emails and you've got boss, and maybe you're like in management, so you got like the boss above, and then you're like responsible for other people, and maybe you got clients or customers coming in, and then the kids are calling. And even if you're enjoying what you're doing, it can still be stressful. And again, those vitamins get used up. And then what happens is we actually need more. We actually need more nutrients. We don't need more coffee necessarily, or other things that don't actually have nutritional value. We actually need more like vegetables and fruit and like vitamins and minerals and enzymes and antioxidants and like all of those awesome things that really nourish our system and help us stay vibrant and feeling really good and alive. Sometimes we overeat just out of habit. Right? If you're like watching TV, or if you always get like, the this with the that, and it comes in a certain size and you always just eat it all, and that's just your habit, or maybe your plates at home are super big and it's just habit to put it on there and you just finish it because that's what you do. Sometimes there's not even like an emotional component to it whatsoever. We just have gotten in the habit of having certain portions of meals when like we don't actually need that. Sometimes we end up overeating just because we have no other plan. even if you don't know exactly everything that you're going to do from every second, some people really like to plan like that, right? Have like every hour, every 15 minutes planned out. Some people like to go by the seat of their pants, but still, if you have no plan whatsoever, and you kind of just end up wandering around through life, especially if you live in the United States, a lot of things are going to be presented that maybe aren't the right fit for your body at that time, but the best choice and or more than you would usually eat. So again, sometimes it can be overeating can have to do with our habits, what we've done earlier in the morning. Sometimes it can be like a signal from the body. Sometimes it can be an emotional thing. It kind of varies, but that's pretty much the basic deal with overeating. It's pretty simple. You're just having more than you actually need. And then we get to emotional eating, which is a little bit different. And sometimes it's not necessarily overeating, right? Because you can emotional eat without making yourself sick and kind of like which would, go into the binge eating where it's kind of like you can't stop until you're going to throw up, or that kind of a feeling where you're like so full. That's a little bit different. Emotional eating can or cannot go along with the physical sensation, but really emotional eating it's not really a physical hunger typically. It might sometimes start as that and then it goes into something else, but typically emotional eating is more about changing a feeling. Right. And that really has a lot more to do with stress and the inability to really manage stress effectively for your benefits, and really navigating that line between just enough to keep you motivated, because we need a little bit of stress, otherwise life is boring, but you don't want so much that you end up going into overwhelm and frustration and disappointment and judgment of yourself and other people. And that kind of stress is not super helpful. So what happens is that when we eat certain things like the sugary, floury, fatty, fried stuff, what happens is that there's an emotional reset. It changes the dynamic inside of our body. It changes the energy inside of our body, and it freaking works. Okay. Like, we're not crazy. People emotional eat. There's nothing wrong with them. There's just that's not the only way to navigate emotions. And sometimes if you only got a hammer, then you look around and everything, you think of everything as a nail, right? Or you're only looking for the nails, but really to have other tools in your toolbox, not just logically knowing, oh yeah, I could go for a walk, or I could call a friend, or I could take a bath, or I could read a book, or any of those things, but really being willing to begin, not all or nothing, but oftentimes when we struggle with something, especially if weight is involved with the emotional eating, and you want to lose weight, but you're an emotional eater, it's really easy to get down on yourself about that. It's really easy to get judgy because it sabotages, right? It kind of puts a damper on a turning road into like what it is that you wanted to do. And we get into this, I've been bad today because I was emotional eating. Well, that is not accurate. Right? Emotional eating sometimes is the kindest thing that you can do for yourself, especially if your brain is telling you you have no other options, right? It's either like suffer with this uncomfortableness or like have whatever this thing is. So sometimes it's the kindest thing you can do. And when we take the time when we're not in that emotional state to really be intentionally clear with ourselves about what other tools we actually already have, not like I'm going to go grab a tool from this person or that person and do what they said because they said it, or, I don't know, I don't have any skills for that. BS. You are way more successful in so many areas of your life than you give yourself credit for. You've done a lot of really good things, and a lot of really good things have helped you and served you. Sometimes what happens though is our mind gets wrapped around this one idea of it being hard and it being challenging and I can't do it. And really it's about unraveling that and looking at things with some sense of truth, meaning really acknowledging the skills and the abilities that you already have. That's a really good first start. Okay, so emotional eating, we just went over that. So overeating is just getting a little too much. Sometimes it can be emotional, but it's pretty simple. Emotional eating is really trying to navigate the emotions, and we tend to go towards things that are going to change the way that we feel. Now, binge eating is a bit different. Binge eating is really more of a loss of control, right? So it's no longer like I'm having these, and I mean, usually you pick the same things, right? Because it can often start either as a little bit of overeating because you didn't, take care of the physical body and you got the trigger. And then sometimes it can go into emotional eating because now we've got the judgment of ourselves. And then what happens though is that binge eating is a little bit different. So there's a lack of control that is felt, where like the inner dialogue is, I don't want to do this anymore. This is the last one. Like I want to be done. I'm never going to do it again. Tomorrow's going to be different. But then the action is something else, right? That it's a continuation of eating. It's a going to the store and specifically looking for things that are going to satisfy the binge and going and getting all of those stuff. And there's kind of like a secrecy that's involved in it too. It's very rare that people really binge together. You can overeat together and you can emotionally eat together, especially if your girlfriend broke up with someone, you're like, all right, let's have a tub of ice cream together, let's have a feeling, something bad happened, you go get pizza, whatever, right? Like emotional eating people can tend to do together, but there's something about the binge eating that is a very personal thing. And oftentimes there is like an emotional kind of trigger back to a traumatic event, usually when we're children, right? There's some things that happened that set the tone for this person's, and I'll tell you, I've definitely struggled with this for many years in my life. And I've shared with you all, several times about a couple of the different instances and traumatic experiences that happened in my life that I realized really triggered this kind of binge eating, where it was more of like a punishment to myself for feeling the way that I felt, or for being who I was, or who I am, and then just not feeling good enough and wanting to change that feeling, like on a very deeper level. So emotional eating is more about what's happening now or in the more recent present. Binge eating tends to be a bit more historic, where there is like it's like kind of like it layers, right? Like a Lego, where just like the pain and the frustration and the confusion of how to navigate emotions and sense of self-esteem and self-worth appropriately, because it was never really taught. And then you go about life, right? And you just get busy, right? It's like, okay, well, now you got to do this. Now you got to do this. Now you got to be this person, that person, graduate from here, go get a job, do the thing. Now you're a parent. Like, I mean, it just keeps going. And sometimes we don't really have taken the time to kind of clean up our past so that we can actually move into the future feeling free and comfortable and confident. It can be triggered by excessive dieting, right? So all of these things can kind of roll together, and it can really trigger it, because it's not just emotional kind of ties that we have to the past. It's also physical, right? Our body also has a memory. It's not just our mind. So if the traumatic experiences that we've had is not necessarily stuff from, typically our parents when we were kids, and the weird messages that we got from them, and the way in which we understood ourselves and the world and our self-esteem, like it can sometimes be that. And other times it can be, I grew up and I thought that I needed to, be this certain way. And so I went on this crazy diet, and this person said that, and it can be more of like adult stuff, but still it's, excessive dieting is funky for the brain. It's also funky for the body, and the body remembers, and it kind of can go into freak out mode. So you can really trigger binge eating from like crazy fasting diets. That's why I always recommend, ladies, God bless you, I love you so much. If you struggle with your weight and with, overeating, emotional eating, or binge eating, I really strongly suggest that you do not do any cleanses or any of those crazy diets where they have you do like 500 calories. It just is a recipe for disaster, physically, mentally, emotionally. I mean, gosh darn it, even spiritually. Although you go a few days without food, you feel like you are spiritual. But that is just like your brain freaking out. It's actually one of the things that I learned a long time ago about anorexia. When you deny your body food for an extended period of time, that your body starts to atrophy and it starts to eat itself. It starts to eat its own organs, and your brain is one of the organs that it starts to eat, because it's muscle, and it's got muscle and fat. So lots of protein, lots of lipids that your body needs to function and properly. And so as it's kind of like destroying your brain cells, there is a neurotoxin that gets released that actually makes you kind of feel euphoric. So just let that sit for a moment. That might be one of the reasons you feel really good when you're doing some crazy restrictive dieting thing. So let's not do that. We need to keep all of our brain cells intact as long as gosh darn possible. And if you know anyone who's getting into the later years and their brain cognition is diminishing, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's just hang on to those. What happens with the binge eating too is it does do a reset. Same with the emotional eating. It's, it stimulates motivation for exercise. And we call that like the purging, right? So you can either get rid of like the calories in the food and forgive yourself by getting rid of the food, either this way or laxatives that way, or like crazy exercising and like motivates you to exercise. So yeah, this definitely, I mean, all three of these can be so incredibly helped with support, right? Because learning to navigate our own, bodies and emotions and habits is so much easier and so much nicer when we have each other. So thank you so much for being here. I'm so blessed to have you. I love you so much. I will talk to you soon.